Greetings, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our last talkback of the semester for Auburn Theater's production of Little Women. My name is Chase Bringardner, and I'm the chair of the theater department as well as the artistic director here. And just want to welcome you all and thank you all for joining us tonight. To start us off, I want to go around and have everyone that's with us tonight in our virtual space introduce themselves and say what their role was on the production, and then we'll get started. So we'll start to my left with Navy.
Hello, everyone. My name is Navy Collins. I'm a sophomore theater major here, and I play Beth March in the production.
Excellent. Mary.
Hi, my name is Mary Keaton. I'm a junior BFA performance major, and I play Jo March.
Great. Deidre.
Hi, I'm Deidre Haig. I'm the director of the production.
Katie.
Hi, my name is Katie Pappas, and I play Meg March.
Jenny.
Hi, my name's Jenny Salter. I am the costume shop manager, and for this particular production, I was also the photographer and photo editor.
Excellent. Ashley.
My name is Ashley Avalon. I'm a junior BFA musical theater major, and I played young Amy.
And last but certainly not least, Tracy.
Hi, I'm Tracy Olenek. I designed the costumes for the production.
Excellent. So as we've started most of these talkbacks, I like to try to start these by giving the director a little bit of a moment to talk about sort of why they chose this particular production or this particular text, what it was that attracted them to this text, and then to sort of talk a little bit about what it was to direct this particular text at this particular moment in this particular medium. So if you want to start, Deidre, by just talking a little bit about what it was that attracted you to Little Women.
Sure. Well, it's a story that many people are familiar with, and it was a story that I had read when I was young and have seen a number of the film versions of it. I think it's a powerful story. I was drawn to it as I am drawn to female-centric plays. We have a big number of talented women in our department, and keeping them active and busy and occupied is important. It's an important part of their training, so that what they're learning in the studio, they can then sort of transfer onto the stage, or in this case, a very different sort of medium. This is an adaptation of Little Women, so it doesn't follow the novel strictly. I think it shares a lot of similar ideas about the passage from childhood to adulthood, to finding out who you are and what you value, to balancing the things that you want to do as an individual, but still remember that you're part of a family. And in this case, in this particular adaptation, which I think is safe to say it's called by the playwright a feminist reclamation of Little Women. For her, it was important to kind of bring the story to the next generation. She wanted the production to be one in which young girls and women all across our country could see themselves in it. She insisted that there be a diverse cast, and she sort of amplifies the circumstances around Jo's coming of age in a more explicit way in terms of gender expression. So it is a story that I think it speaks to the present moment, but still sort of reaches back to a time where, even though we are, over 100 years in the past, we are still seeing these sort of similar ideas about people letting themselves. There's a scene in the production where Joe says to Lori, the boy next door, I'm not very good at being a lady. And he says, I'm not very good at being a gentleman. So we should probably just be ourselves. And that's kind of one of the central ideas in the play. In terms of how we were going to sort of pivot during COVID, the playwright wrote an awful lot of stage directions in the play, so that while we knew that we would not be able to stage the production and people wouldn't be seen moving or interacting with each other physically, there is quite a lot of stage direction that could sort of help fill in the narrative line of the production as we told the story. And the idea came to us that we could create an audio production where people could listen to the play as though the play was being read to them. And we came up with some scaffolding like illustrations so that people could have a sort of a sense of who was playing each role and give us a sense of the period. And hopefully we can talk about that process later on. But it's still a very powerful story about identity and community. So I think those themes are always present.
For sure. I'm wondering if anyone who is sort of involved from either from the production side or from the cast side wants to kind of speak about what it was to engage with this particular story. Was this a story that you all knew beforehand? Had you engaged with it in terms of reading it, in terms of seeing one of the many film adaptations, maybe engaging with the musical? There's lots of different ways in which this story's been told. So I'm interested in hearing a bit from you all about what your background is with the material before you approached this particular production. Anyone want to jump in there? Yeah, Mary.
For me, full disclosure, I will get shot down for this. I have not read the book. I have not read the novel. I really, really wanted to read it. I just lost a lot of time during the semester, but I really wanted to read it. My mom had read it before. So I think that was an interesting approach, especially since this is an adaptation of the book. It's not necessarily correctly in line with the novel, but what was interesting to me is I refrained from watching any of the movies, any movie adaptations, anything like that, because I didn't want to pick up something from those actors that I might incorporate and then it not be my own. I think that's very important to me, is get it from the text, get it from how you perceive that character based on the personality traits and the characteristics. So I refrained from watching a lot of those. The cool thing that Deidre gave us is she gave us a lot of background information about the Alcott's life. And so Little Women is something that Louisa May Alcott has used her own life really infused into that story, a lot of her own life and her own characteristics. Like Joe is very much, very, very similar to Louisa herself, as far as like they both love nature, they're both very boyish, they both grew up pretty in a very, not necessarily extremely poor family, but a poorish family, and with trying times. And so for me, I got to read a lot about the background information of the Alcott's life and of Louisa's life and what it was like to be a writer, a woman who loved to write back then in that time period when that was kind of considered a no-no, that women should not be doing that. So for me, it was very interesting to take the background of the Alcott and of Louisa and some of the story, like the plot line of the novel, and really kind of, and then read the play, read this adaptation, read it and think about how am I going to create the iconic character of Joe, but how am I going to make it my own? And specifically with this adaptation. So I think that was a really fun challenge for me to do.
Excellent. Any other performers want to weigh in and kind of about what your knowledge of the novel or the story was pre coming into your performance? Oh, yeah, Katie, and then Ashley.
I hadn't really been like we read Little Women, I think, when I was in 8th grade, so it had been a while since I'd been familiar with it. Besides the Greta Gerwig adaptation, that I think at this point it's been a year. So, and then obviously, like you said, the musical. So I was familiar with it, but I really didn't remember much about it. And I think it's kind of like what Mary said. There's also been so many different adaptations that and everyone kind of has their own idea of who the Little Women are to them, especially when you read it at such a young age and how you connect with the characters. And not gonna lie, it was very intimidating going in because it's such a beloved work and there's been so many different adaptations. I mean, Emma Watson played Meg in it, and then I was like, how am I supposed to, like, how am I gonna do this? Like, how could I ever compete? And it is just like this play itself is a different Little Women than a lot of the Little Women adaptations that I've seen personally. And I think that's what made it kind of comforting in a way, is that like Meg has her jam monologue in Act Two. There's really not something that you see like that in other adaptations and other works. And I think it was just trusting that trusting Deidre to guide me where I needed to be and fulfilling her vision, and then just understanding that this is the Meg that I'm going to be doing, and with all the research and just trusting yourself with the process. So
Excellent. Ashley.
Kind of similar to Mary, I had seen the movie when it first came out, but I decided not to rewatch it just because I didn't want to pull anything from that, even subconsciously. But I had some exposure to the novel back in high school, and I chose to reread parts of that before our research night. And I think doing the research, like Mary said, with the Alcott's life and kind of using that as a jumping point as we went in to kind of take on this new adaptation was really helpful.
Excellent. Navy, did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, I like Mary have not read the novel. I did want to myself, but I have not read it, and it was interesting to me because the knowledge that I had about Little Women came from one of my high school theater teachers. It's her favorite show. She loved it, and that's all I knew about it. But like the research night and Daydream, we couldn't have gone in blind. Like there's just so much knowledge that was shared, and even though I haven't read the novel, it's like I know so much about it because it was we've always had conversations about the differences in the novel and the differences in the adaptation that we did. And although I had no previous knowledge about it, I felt like I've learned so much. And although I have not read the novel, it's like I kind of read the novel off second wind. So I thought that was really cool.
Well, it definitely is one of those stories that it seems like almost like I'm trying to think of, like, I guess other examples would be like, I don't know, A Christmas Carol or something. It seems like every generation has its own adaptation, and like I vividly remember, the adaptation that was meaningful to my generation was the Susan Sarandon, Winona Ryder, Claire Danes, and it was like peak. I think what 1990s. It was like so amazingly 90s, and then this Gerwig adaptation, which seems so to this particular moment in a way. And that's not to mention the sort of the original black and white version, and just that this story just is continually told in all of these ways, in ways that sort of both reflect the time in which it's being produced in addition to the original story. So from more of a production end, I don't know if Jenny and Tracy, if you all want to talk a little bit about what your all's engagement was with this novel, and kind of how that relationship sort of influenced your work, sort of both within the costumes but also within the sort of the photography. Yep, Tracy.
Come on. Okay. I have seen every version of Little Women from the time I was like 10. So I've seen Katharine Hepburn do it. I've seen Liz Taylor. I love the PBS version that came out a couple of years ago that had 4 different nights of it, which is just amazing. So, it's in my soul. And I love the 1860s for costume, and just reading this new adaptation and then knowing that I would only get to have one moment with each of the actors to see them in one quick frame, to put that in everybody's head. What can I do to show the 1860s, to show that they're really wearing these clothes, and to help the audience see each character in their entirety really quickly, because that's what's going to just stay in the audience's mind, because then you go back to seeing just the book and that stays with you. Even as you hear their voice, you're going to still see that. So I take the pictures of the actors and draw the sketches using the 1860s clothing, but also thinking about what can the costume shop make? What can students make? What will they learn about the 1860s that they can do? No, they would have had sewing machines at this time, so it's cool to use a sewing machine, but the decoration is very, very simple because they just wouldn't have had the money for it. I love it. That's my
That's awesome.
Period. Yeah.
Ginny?
So for me, I also grew up like Tracy, having seen all of the versions of Little Women up to the point of, I mean, until my adulthood now, watching the most recent one. I also am a big fan of the PBS version. That's probably my favorite. Um, and I read the book probably when I was about 14, I think, for the first time. And so I have a long time special love of Little Women, especially because as a youngster, I always related very heavily to Joe. I felt like a little bit of a tomboy and a, different kind of girl, weird artsy kid who put on plays, for my family. I 100% did that, bossing my cousins around. I didn't have siblings, so it was cousins, but bossing them around and putting them in roles. So for me, making the costumes with Tracy was such a special moment, getting to you know, put the actors into these garments, and then to photograph them. I kind of felt like I was living with the Marches a little bit, and kind of getting to step into their world as we did the photographs at Pebble Hill, and was in a house that's from the period with furniture that's from the period. It did feel a lot like I'd kind of been welcomed into the March family finally. So it was a very, very special experience, and very different from what we normally do. So it was just kind of special all around, and I really loved it.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you so much for sharing that, everyone. I just want to remind anyone who's watching out there that if you have questions or anything that you would like to ask about the production, or of anyone who's in this presentation today, feel free to type those into the chat function, and we will be happy to answer those for you. So sort of transitioning us slightly, I think one of the things that strikes me a lot about this particular adaptation by Kate Hamill, upon reading it, is sort of its inherent theatricality, which I think is, and thinking about sort of the ways in which you've got, for example, a real the standard of the parrot, for example, human sort of portraying the role of parrot, but also the way in which sort of the script leans very heavily into the kind of theatricality that is so much of the way in which Joe envisions and sees the world. And I guess my sort of overall question, and sort of transitioning from sort of out of talking about Little Women as a whole and kind of concept into talking about this particular production, and sort of the pivot into the audio play with photographs in this sort of virtual space, is what was that process like? So to sort of have this script that you had sort of decided on, knowing initially that this was something that had been sort of initially planned as something that would be staged in a more traditional theatrical way, and then to kind of have that shift into the sort of the audio drama with photographs. What was that process like for all of you? How would you sort of describe that process, and what were the particular sort of challenges and opportunities that came up as a result of that? Perhaps starting, Deidre, with you as director.
One of the things that was helpful, as I said earlier, was the narrator, and we created a role for the narrator. The narrator talks about the sword fighting, or the shaking chest and out pops Lori, or Ashley or Amy falling into the snowbank. And we incorporated the stage directions so that the actors would have a imaginative sense of what was going on physically in the production. And we talked about that the work of the actor was still going to be about doing the research and understanding the characters' objectives and, organizing the scene so that they knew where the beats were. And so, and we also encouraged the actors to stand so they could be in their bodies and be under their breath when they were rehearsing and particularly when they were recording. And watching them, they obviously couldn't physically do everything that was described in the play, but they knew where they were in place and time. And so you could see they were attempting to sort of physicalize within their own sort of kinesphere exactly what was going on in the play, so that would be, you would hear that in their voices as they were engaging with one another. And the other thing too is that they were able to see one another. They were able to connect with one another in that way. And so we tried to do as much embodiment of the roles as we possibly could in the given space.
Excellent. From a performer perspective, how was that process for you all in terms of, yep, Navy?
The process was interesting. It wasn't as different as you would think. Like Deidre said, we still had to do our research. We still had to be off book. It wasn't as different as you would suspect. It also gave us a little insight on maybe voiceover acting, and it was cool. I think in the beginning, the most difficult part for me would probably be realizing that I I can't get caught up in the, well, we did definitely get caught up in the moment sometimes and would skip over the narrator lines. And it was like, okay, we need this. So with the adrenaline of the scene, typically we don't hear the narrator lines. So it's like, I gotta stop. But other than that, it wasn't as abstract as you would suspect. So
Excellent. Other performers want to weigh in on that experience, the process? Yeah, Ashley?
I'll say that Amy was a particularly interesting character to take on being in my own home, just because she is such a ball of energy. And so I think it was definitely a challenge, but I think, like Navy said, it wasn't as different as I originally thought it was going to be. It was a lot of like making sure that you're connecting with the person on the screen, as hard as that may be, as an adjustment. Once we kind of got into the rehearsal process, it became easier every day. And I think it was about making that space for me. Like before rehearsal started, I would warm up, I would do everything I needed to do, and then I had to have full focus on the screen and just make that like the world for the marches, because there were so many scenes like I would leave and Amy would run back on out of breath, as the narration said. And so I was literally running circles around my apartment like I was running, and Jenna would think I was crazy, my roommate, because she was doing another production at the time. So you would just hear me running circles around my living room. But that's what you got to do when you're in your home and you're in this platform. So it was a really interesting experience for sure as an actor, and it really pushed me, definitely.
And I think that sometimes, when they talk about sort of obstacles that get put into one's way or sort of things that you have to encounter can strengthen, the bond that you all have together. And I think one of the things that a lot of this Zoom theater, I think, has sort of challenged us and has really provided, again, I think a great opportunity for, is that at its essence, right, when we're doing theater, the root of that is the telling of stories. And I think one of the things that this production, I think, does so beautifully, and does it in such a way that is both incredibly theatrical, but not in the ways that we normally think of theatrical, through the use of sort of limited visuals, is that it really allows the audience to kind of paint this very rich world and sort of requires in some ways a bit more, I would even say, of an audience than many productions do, because you're having to fill in all of those kinds of things. And I think, just sort of hearing you all talk about that, the behind the scenes things, I just find it, I find it so striking, right? How you're, oh, it was so similar to, in many ways, it would not be as dissimilar as you would think. But then in terms of hearing some of the stories coming out of the process of, just the images of, you all in your costumes, right, in your homes with a recorder in your own apartment away from each other. I mean, from an outside perspective, if you're looking at that, you're like, that does not seem like a normal process. But that when it comes together, like the final result still has the same um, impact, right, in terms of the ways in which the story wins out and comes together and sort of comes through, no matter kind of the I guess arrangements that have to be made in order to reach that portion or that end goal. I wonder if either Tracy or Jenny want to talk sort of what about sort of how this was similar or different to your all's typical processes, and sort of what that was like to kind of know that your costumes were sort of venturing out, not only just to like the dressing rooms and the main stage, but to people's apartments and homes.
I was so happy when Mary said, "Do you think I could have my costume when we record?" And before that, I never thought any of the actors would be up for that kind of thing. But I was so happy that everybody did that. And especially on your Instagram or wherever I'm seeing your like 3 minutes of you getting ready, it's great. And it makes me feel like you made the costume your clothing, as if you were pulling it out of your closet that day. And that's, of course, what you would wear as, Meg or Beth. Of course, that's what you would put on your body. And you became that person. It was really wonderful to hear.
That's amazing. Jenny, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, just it's been a strange semester for us in the costume shop, but in a lot of ways some things haven't changed, and I think the biggest thing that hasn't changed is the creative process, and you know from getting the designs from Tracy to implementing that and putting them on the actors' bodies in a way has stayed much the same. There's obviously more procedures and masks involved, but it's been a comfort to know that the creative process and the collaboration that we have in the costume shop hasn't changed. And then not seeing it in a dress rehearsal, not going on to the main stage was different and was strange. But it was fun to take them to a location like Pebble Hill and put them in their costumes and their wigs there, and get them to be in the character and in the moment for the photos. That it was definitely very different, but also very fulfilling in a different way. So there was a lot that changed, but there was also a lot that stayed the same. And I think in a way for me that kind of helped push me through what has been a very weird uh, moment in theater, and has kind of given me hope for our art form.
Sure. We actually had a question come in that was directed towards you, Jenny, specifically around the taking of pictures. It was saying here, since taking pictures isn't something you normally do as the costume shop manager, how was that experience of taking and editing the photos as part of a creative process? Sort of how did that extend out of what you normally do, or what was that like for you?
Oh gosh, that's a good question. So, just a little bit of background. When I got my Master of Fine Arts in graduate school, I did have to take performance photography classes. The idea in my program was that as designers and technicians, we would be in need of being able to document our own work. So the photographs that I typically take are in the moment of like trying clothes on people, and it's basically a photo of someone in a costume that has pins in it and probably markings, and then I move on into like when we do dress rehearsals, I take photographs during dress rehearsals people on stage under stage lighting. And so what was different and kind of a challenge was going from my training is very much taking photographs and stage lighting. And in the moment when people are moving, when they're saying their lines, when they're being their character. So I had to kind of adjust to the lighting, the natural lighting of the house. We did have some light boxes that we used, but I didn't want to use bounce cards or anything like that because it's not how I'm trained. I'm trained to use the lighting that is just there. So I kind of thought I can kind of translate that training to the natural lighting of the house, and then edit what, might be different because we didn't do it all in one day. We did it over the course of the week, and a couple of days were rainy and a couple of days were really sunny. So I had to try and match the lighting on the back end. And I just kind of took that and did my best to make it work. But I think what I really tried to keep the same was that Deidre and I really wanted them to act. Not for the family photos where they're sitting in front of the fireplace. Those are very specifically like the stoic family photos. But for the rest that appear as like scene photos, we really wanted them to act and be in the moment as their character, so that the audience would get that feeling and that would kind of translate through. So that's where it was most the same, because I am used to taking photos of people acting on stage. So
Great.
does that answer the question?
Yeah, no, that's really great. We're having an amazing amount of wonderful questions that are coming in, so I'm going to try to make sure that we get to all of these in a way that makes logical sense here. But if you have more questions that you would love to ask, please feel free to drop them into the chat, and we will do our best to answer all of them, as I said, in a timely manner. I wanted to sort of make sure that we had a little bit of time before we dive into some of these specific questions to address the audio, because I think that's again one of the things that I think from an outside perspective, if you've seen audio recording sort of, or depictions of audio recording, oftentimes it's done in sort of one lovely, amazingly equipped sound studio, which everybody goes in and has their time. They record their vocal and then they leave, and there's like, sound dampening equipment and like all sorts of electronics all around, and it makes the perfect thing, right? Well, in this particular production, we had an amazing sort of sound designer and engineer who assisted all of our performers in turning, again, parts of their own homes into a de facto recording studio. So I know that Anthony, our Narciso, wasn't able to join us today, but I know, Deidre, you have a little bit of some of the information that might be interesting to our audience out there about just exactly the kind of complicated nature of what that task was for you all in this production.
I'm going to read directly from Anthony's email. We knew going in that sound was going to be a very important component to this production, and he has created so many layers of sound, not just recording the actors, but the sound effects, and he also composed original music for the show as well. He writes, how do you record 14 performers reacting with one another from 14 separate locations? So 4 mobile recording device setups were purchased to handle the voice recordings, and an additional recorder was purchased as a spare and doubled for the recordings of sound effects. And when the recording was complete, and so each night, 4 actors recorded. And what was kind of wonderful was to see the cast, because they were able to see one another as we had rehearsed, but they had earphones on to sort of block any atmospheric sounds. But even though, say, only 4 actors were being recorded that night, every night this cast behaved as though they were being recorded. So they gave it their all 4 nights, right? 4 times for the recordings, even though their performance time may have passed already. In any case, after the recording was complete, the mixing process went into full swing. Each character's dialogue was individually cleaned, edited, and put into place. Silence was the biggest enemy during this phase of the process. Actor timing was based on Zoom over several different days of recording, so the only way to preserve the pace of the play was to splice our 100 audio files into over 1,200 individual pieces so lines could be hand moved to their proper location. Finalizing these edits took roughly 2 weeks of editing time, with 4 revisions of the play being sent to the director for notes. Music and sound effects, which were created and recorded by the sound team ahead of time, were gradually mixed in as the dialogue of each scene was finalized. The final product had a runtime of around 2 hours, and each revision that was exported took around 45 minutes to 1 hour to completely render. So that was a very labor-intensive process. In addition to that, he wrote the score. Obviously, piano was central to the sound design because of its prominence for Beth and for Lori, and also he wanted to add strings to make that, give it a more what he called rustic romantic feel. And he also conceived of the sisters as woodwind instruments. He says, if you follow the woodwinds, you're following the narrative of the play. So it was really lovely work from him on so many levels. And he was so great with the actors on the night of recording. He was super patient. Everybody had to learn how to use that recording device. And even when there was a mistake, there was like, no problem. We'll just go back and do it again. He was so unflappable, and I think put the actors at ease so that they could do their best work.
That's amazing. I mean, when you hear about the number of audio, I mean, that's yeah. I am obviously no sound engineer, but that is incredible. Sort of going along these lines, and I think this is a really interesting, little bit of like a challenging question, I think, which is interesting. So someone is asking, do you think the elimination of the majority of the visual elements, so the way in which this sort of is presented as an audio drama, do you think that the elimination of the majority of the visual elements contributed to the feminist aspect of the performance, or did it add anything to the work that you hadn't anticipated? So sort of what is the mode of sort of showcasing or presenting this particular text, the style or I guess the means of presentation? What impact do you think that had on the text itself? Did it highlight for you some of those sort of feminist aims that Kate Hamill sort of talked about? Because I think, when we talk about feminist theory, you talk a lot about voice, and you talk a lot about sort of who gets to speak. And I think in some ways there's some very interesting, by isolating and sort of showcasing speech in terms of this, there's some interesting ways that may play into this. I don't know if anyone has anything they want to kind of, thought it was a very provocative, interesting question.
I'll just start off with that because I think, yes, a lot can be learned by watching the body in motion. That was clearly something that we missed as part of the production. But I think when you're listening, you can focus more clearly when you're watching something on stage. There's so much stimulus to watch because of the spectacle, because you're trying to sort of adapt to figuring out what the story is. I think that the fact that there wasn't a lot of visual detail focused you more on character and character development and what each character was going through and what each character was sort of striving for. Of course, I can't be objective about it at this point, right? So, but from my perspective, you could focus more on the ideas of the play with a little bit less spectacle.
Yep, Mary?
I think going off of that, coming from a performance aspect, what was really difficult for me personally was the fact that it was stripping so much of what performers rely on, which is the physicality, physically being in the space, having the audience, having the surroundings, the set, the atmosphere, instead of being in your bedroom, turning around, trying to do the soliloquy of why I can't love you because I only think of you as a brother. And then I look over and I see my closet and I'm like, that's not where I'm supposed to be. And just having all of that atmosphere, it does as an actor kind of, and not having your partner there. We can see them and it was great, but there's something that is just, it strips it so much of what we love as actors, which is that live, that physically being there and being in the space. And I think an interesting thing that happened with this audio is that there was one night where we just turned off all of our videos and we just set it. We just listened to the audio that was happening from everybody else and we just set our audio into the space. And I think that was really, it was completely different. It was a very different change because now you're only listening to, okay, what are they giving me and how can I respond with that? And I think that was really cool. I think that was really helpful, especially with kind of creating your character, because everything, that's another big challenge, was everything had to come from the voice, because you're not seeing Joe jump up on a table or Meg cry with jam covered all over. You don't see the different scenarios. You only hear about them from the narrator. And Emily Gant beautifully did the narrator justice 100% by giving us the physical things that we can think about. But I think as an actor, it definitely hit pretty hard as far as how I connected with the character, how close I got with it, because of so many things, so many elements that are missing from live theater. But I think it was definitely a cool experience to have the ability to be able to focus and hone in the skills of the voice and how we do that. Deidre taught us a lot about, especially with junior BFAs, we learn a lot of IPA speech. And so a lot of what we needed to do is have this main kind of, so nobody had different accents or different ways of saying different things. Deidre was very strict about us being perfect with that IPA. And as much as it really was taxing and you know, as difficult as it can be, I mean, I say get a lot and it's get. You want to make sure that your Southern accent doesn't come out in Boston, Massachusetts. But I think it was really cool to be able to hone in on learning how to speak eloquently. There's no right or wrong way to speak, but learning how to speak with purpose and with character, I think was really cool. So.
Sure, and I think one of the things that I think this particular style of delivery, I guess, really highlighted for me in ways that I sort of had, you know, knew from the original text in its various iterations, but it really to me highlighted the difference between young Amy and Joe, and the ways, particularly for them, that one of the primary places of conflict for them is the way in which they use language, and are both in their own way struggling to find voice, but in very different ways. And I think that by sort of having the focus be on the audio, it really just sort of put them, both of those two characters, in kind of a different frame for me than in any other sort of production of this story that I had seen previously. Obviously, their conflict is across, you can see that in all of the adaptations, right? But I think particularly the way in which this one very much highlights the sort of malapropisms, the sort of the play with language that both of them do, but in very different ways, that becomes sort of a central point of conflict, was really highlighted, I think, in a really beautiful way that I don't know that in another version of this production would have been so pointed out in that way. So I think that's really awesome. Another question that has come into the chat here has to do with Zoom, the Zoom format, which we've all become very familiar with, and Zoom has infiltrated all of our lives in very many ways, both in class, in rehearsal, in our everyday lives. So the question here is, Zoom presents tons of unlikely challenges. Yes, that is true. What is your favorite or most memorable story from working with Zoom and the other technological elements? I guess this is sort of like the behind the scenes I guess, I don't know, the blooper reel, or the what was a moment that either was like particularly funny, or maybe one that sort of like where you felt really proud because you felt like you learned a new skill, um, something, anything with engaging in the Zoom world there? Yeah, Ashley?
I can't remember who all was on rehearsal that night because I think it was at a point where we were breaking down scenes, going scene by scene. But Zach had a fire drill during rehearsal. We were all in the middle of a scene, and like I said, it's kind of hard to focus in on the screen sometimes. So we were all learning that skill, and all of a sudden we just hear the fire alarm going off. Luckily, it was just a drill, everything was okay, but he had to do rehearsal from his car for a little bit. So that was just one of those moments where you remembered, oh, yep, I'm in my home on Zoom doing theater. But it was funny for sure, a funny story.
No, that's great. Thank you for sharing that. Anyone else have any Zoom insights? Yep, Nate.
I think the funniest thing for me is that there are a couple of times where like Mary, for instance, she come in giving it her all, and we're like, Mary, you're on mute. And I just think that was so funny. It was just it's like, wow, this is the life.
I would look over and I would be just going like doing Rodrigo's monologue, and I'd look over and I'd go, oh shoot, like that. I'd be like, sorry guys, let me start over.
That is a big Zoom challenge for sure. I can't tell you how many times that I've done that myself. So following sort of along off of this, somebody's asking here, what is something that you will take away from doing this radio play that will help you in future productions? So sort of thinking about this as part of a pedagogical process, right? One of the things that we as a department tried to do across in this sort of moment of COVID was to sort of embrace the moment and sort of commit to creating performance, but to try to provide a myriad of different ways to create performance, to try to have students learn new skill sets across the different productions that we were doing. And this particular production of Little Women, presented as sort of an audio play with these visuals, was an attempt to exercise some new muscles. So I'm interested to kind of hear both from the performer perspective, but also from more of the either the costume production side or the director side. What are some of the things that you learned from this process that you think you might take on forward once we get to a different type of performance again? Yep, Katie.
Mary already touched on this a little bit, but just in junior BFA, we've been working on with IPA and speech a lot. And I feel very lucky that I got to do this production because it's like as we were learning everything in BFA, I was getting practical application for a full-length show. And of course I would have been cognizant of IPA, but if it was a regular show and we were performing, but then you're focused on blocking and things like that. But it was really nice to be able to sit down and mark through my script all of the IPA notes, and then in rehearsal and when we were given notes, that was the main a lot of the focus was on that. So I feel like it has really been drilled into my head than it may have not have been if I was not in this production. Just like getting that practical application, I think has really helped me. And it's even before Daedry would even give notes some nights, I would sit there, I would say the line, I'd be like, I know exactly the note she's about to give me on this. For like right now, I was like, I used I didn't use my low front A or something like that. So I think it was really nice to be able to have in this show like a way to have the practical application of something so specific that we would have had, but maybe not to the extent that we had.
Mm-hmm. What else? What else are we going to take forward from this moment? Yeah, Navy.
I agree with what Katie said, but I think another thing that I would take away is the idea that the audience may like, what if the audience can't see me? Because doing it audio, it forces you to connect with the lines in a way that the audience has to hear the emotion. They can't see it. So you have to say the lines in a way to where you can express that. Like, because yes, we did have the narrations, but it's like you have to keep it there. You have to keep that energy, that emotion there. And I just think that was it was a challenge, but I think it was a good challenge. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. What about from a director's perspective, Daedry? Did you pick up on any sort of tricks that you feel like you would continue on in future directing projects?
It's funny. It's kind of like what Navy was talking about earlier. In a lot of ways, it didn't really seem that different. Really, I mean, aside from not having to physically stage the play, every other kind of direction that I would give would be something that I would sort of give if they were moving on stage. But there was something useful about, I think, doing the night that we turned our cameras off, because during the whole process I could see them, and they were very up close and personal, and so it was very clear to read what they were trying to communicate. And so when we turned the cameras off, I thought, well, now we will get to experience kind of what our audience will, right? They won't be able to see anything. All of our information will be coming through our ears, like when you're telling someone a story, right? Oral culture. And the thing that was surprising to me was it was still all there, that their voices were imprinting everything that they were doing. So I mean, that was sort of a remarkable discovery. I assumed that I would lose a certain level of their work because I couldn't see them. But in fact, we talked about this afterwards. Very little was lost, because everything was coming, it was through their vessel, their physical and vocal instrument. And so, yeah, so just my sort of confirmed my belief in the importance of voice, right? How much is communicated, because we talk about that a lot. When you are in a theater, that is one of the things you don't really, not very many people in the audience actually see your face the way you think they do. They're really relying on what you're doing physically and vocally to communicate. So yeah, it was an interesting experiment for sure.
For sure, for sure. What about from costume land? Anything that was particularly different about this production, or that you sort of felt like you had to adapt to, that you'll carry on moving forward?
It was very hard because I couldn't touch them. I am so used to touching and helping with adjustment to make sure that your clothing fits exactly as I had intended. And I wasn't able to do that. So I had to communicate with words what I wanted them to do with the clothing. So that communication from me is very different than I'm so used to showing, and I'll show you and I'll touch you, and was not allowed to do any of that through the COVID.
Right,
Yeah.
right. It's a yeah. That's the challenges of that kind of communication for sure. Are it
And
is.
also showing people how to do things in
Mm,
a costume shop. How does this particular technique work? I want to show you something from 1860. This is how they would have done it, but I can't get up close and personal enough to really show them that way, and had to find very many other ways around it. So perhaps my thinking and how to communicate has really changed.
sure, sure. Jenny, did you have anything you wanted to add there?
Yeah, I mean, I think Tracy said most of it, but you know, oddly, not just from this show, but from the productions for the whole semester, we changed some things that we've done in the costume shop, like typically our cutting tables where we cut all of the fabric for the garments that we're later going to sew. Typically, those are covered in brown butcher paper, and we've switched those to a marine vinyl. It's like a heavy duty upholstery vinyl that you would find on the seat cushions of a boat. And I think we've both kind of fallen in love with that because it's super easy to clean. It kind of is self-healing. So when we put push pins in it, it doesn't leave holes. So oddly, we found a few things around the shop that were like, oh, this is actually, it's kind of forced us to adapt in different ways. I think the thinking on our feet and the communication skills that we've developed from not being able to touch people or from having to do things differently are definitely like muscles that we've kind of formed that I think we'll carry with us. And then on a personal level, it kind of reawakened my love of photography. So that was kind of nice, like on a personal, very specific to this show kind of thing. So
That's great. That's really great. And as we've got about 5 minutes left of our, so what has been a really lovely, this has been a really lovely conversation. Thank you all for engaging as you have. And at the risk of sounding too much like a BuzzFeed quiz, I think this is it's a good question kind of to end on. And if everybody kind of wants to weigh in as a way of kind of summing up, that would be great. So the question is a simple one. Which March sister do you relate the most to? And perhaps why? Be brief. And it, any answer, there's no right answer. So however that question strikes you, and I do realize that for those of you that played March Sisters, that are that is perhaps a challenging question, or maybe a very easy question.
I was about to say, I think I literally think that is a very easy. I think Joe is very much, and that's why I enjoyed the fact that I got to have this role. That's why I enjoyed this role so much, is because she was so close to my personality traits. We love going outdoors. We love doing boyish things, like, kicking around the football. I grew up with 4 older brothers, and but also I think I relate a little bit to Meg as well, in the sense that I am a little bit more mature. Joe's a little more childish, I think, which I do have that side, but I think a more reserved and mature side is a little bit towards Meg as well, but mainly with Joe for sure. So that's easy for me.
Excellent. Navy, do you have an answer that you would like to share with us?
Yes, I too feel like this is an easy question, and I think I relate the most to Beth because I love family. She loves family. She'll do anything to keep them happy, and she wants everyone to live their truth. And I agree with that. She wants you to be you, and I love her. I love her. Even though she's on the younger side, she's wise, and it's just she's me. Yeah.
How about you, Jenny?
So I definitely relate to Joe. I always did as a kid. Like I said, I was a bit of a tomboy. I'm an only child, but I grew up with a Marine father. So I was not treated as a girl. I was just treated as a kid. And I climbed trees and I put on plays for my family. I even had a boy that I grew up with that was basically my Lori, who I later was like, I'm sorry, you're like a brother. But in my adult years, I kind of tend to relate a little more to Meg. So, and I've always loved Meg as well. But yeah, it's kind of a toss up. If the two of them were like melded together.
Excellent. Katie.
So I would say before this production, I think I would have said Joe, but getting to really know Meg, I do find a lot of qualities of her that I think I see myself in. So I kind of what Jenny was saying, if I could morph the two together, yes, but for the sake of this, I'm going to say Meg.
Excellent. Okay. Deidre. I do realize this is like making you pick like a favorite child or something.
We're about to find out who Deidre's favorite child is.
You're on mute, I think.
I guess my honest answer would be I see myself in all of them. Joe, obviously, and doing the research about this play, you can't imagine how many women across cultures and generations have been inspired by that character, from bell hooks to Gloria Steinem. I mean, it's just amazing. So her independence of spirit, I think there is something maternal about me that I respond to with regard to Meg. Family is important, like with Beth, and I see myself still as an adolescent in some respects. So Amy, and sort of needing to assert herself and being not quite certain who she is. I mean, I think there's a piece of all of these women in all of us, right? We're more than one thing, but I know what the question was, but all of them. I see all of them.
Great answer. That's a great answer. Ashley.
I think I'm gonna have to stick with my girl Amy. I think I growing up
Well,
like
talk about your pyramid.
yes, okay. So during character night, I did a pyramid, like a Dance Mom style pyramid, where I put everyone in the cast on a different point in the pyramid and I gave a reason why. And I think similarly to Amy, I am kind of the person that speaks out in my family. Like Beth, family is very important to me, but I'm definitely like the stubborn one, kind of the loud one, just like Amy is. And so I think I see the like fun, like outgoing part of Amy and myself, but I also see like the tenacity and kind of the way that she goes after what she wants in myself as well.
Excellent. And Tracy?
I would say it's Meg. I like it that she's a girl and just wants to be a girl and have her family. And by golly, I'll buy that fabric that I really want. But oh my gosh, my husband is going to kill me. I'll never be able to buy anything ever, ever again. But then you do it anyway.
There you go. And just I'll play two real quick. I think for me, it's only fair if I ask you that I should have to answer to. I feel like for me, it's the warring tension between Amy and Joe. I feel like it's like two little sides on each of my shoulder, and like particularly this production sort of read together with the Gerwig, it's the sort of the competing different approaches to young artists, and I definitely feel that tension that exists in the different ways in which that artistic impulse manifests in both of those characters. So just to be fair. So we are at our time. I thank you all so much. This was an incredibly lovely conversation with some really amazing questions from our audience, and it is a beautiful, wonderful production. So for those of you that have already listened to it and seen the beautiful costumes in those images, you have until Sunday evening to go and listen to it again as many times as you want, right? This is what's amazing about this time of COVID and these Zoom performances is that you don't just get to watch it the one time. You can watch it as many times as you want, over and over again. You can finish it and start it right again, right? It's amazing. And if for some reason you're watching and you haven't had a chance to watch it yet, you can still go ahead and purchase access and watch it all the way up through till the end of Sunday evening. So we hope that you will, if you haven't already, and we hope if you've already seen it, go back and listen to it again with all of our thoughts in mind. This is our last show, as I mentioned, of the fall semester. We'll be back with you all again in early March with our spring musical, which is a cabaret entitled New Day Dawning, which will be filmed on location both at the GPAC, the Goose Performing Arts Center, and in our own theater space. So look for that. There'll be another virtual talkback around that production as well. In the meantime, please, everyone, stay safe and healthy. And thank you all for joining us today. Thank you all for being here in this Zoom room with us. And thank you for watching at home. So take care.